All right, everyone, I want to welcome you to the AdCast. And what a better way, there's not a better way to kick it off than to have this industry titan on the phone, or a lucky general on the phone, Mr. Andy from the Lucky Generals. I want to give him definitely a round of applause in here and tell everybody a little bit about Andy. He is no stranger at all to the marketing and creative industry. You've probably seen or heard some of his work. And if you've seen the Super Bowls, you've probably seen his latest work about Alexa reading your mind. And that comes from the creative genius of the Lucky Generals as well, and Mr. Andy on the phone. They have some offices in New York and also in London. And he's actually in London talking to us right now. Andy, say hi to the audience, man.
Hi, everyone. Thanks very much for having me on the show.
So, man, Andy, it's good to have you, man. We got a lot to unpack, man. You're a busy guy. You're a busy guy. I started reading about how you guys actually just kind of walked out and said, this isn't how agencies are supposed to be anymore. And you kind of went on your own. I want to get into that. But first, I want people to know exactly who you are, if you don't mind telling them.
Yeah, sure. So I guess I should explain my funny accent, which might be unfamiliar to some of you. So I'm from Scotland originally, although I've not lived there for about 30 years. And I sort of stumbled into advertising by accident, really. I was studying law at university, at college. And I figured I didn't really want to be a lawyer. And so someone suggested that I should, if I liked putting the facts forward and, telling a story on behalf of a client, but I wanted to do it in a maybe more creative sort of fashion, then I should try advertising. So I sort of fell into that by accident and found I really liked it. And so I've worked in agencies, mostly in the UK, mostly in London, but I had a little stint in San Francisco at Goodby's, Silverstein, which I loved. Had my first kid out there. So I've got a kid with an American passport. And I think he's always telling me that he's eligible for president when he's, I think you've got to be 35 and
That's
born
right
in the States.
Andy, he's right. He's right, Andy.
So he's going to take over the world watch out for him in 15 years' time. Ever since then, we've been working in agencies in London and then set up Lucky Generals about 9 years ago with two very good friends of mine. So having lots of fun.
Man, that's awesome, Andy. Now, you said you actually were studying law. So what a change going from law to going into advertising and creative. I mean, you just said like you just like to be able to tell that story. I mean, how is that transition for you? I mean, were the parents like, no, Andy, you have to continue being a lawyer or be a lawyer. Don't be an ad guy or a creative guy. I mean, what was that like for you?
It was good because my parents were really good. They didn't know anything about law. None of my family had anything to do with the law, and none of them knew anything about advertising. So they just sort of said, do whatever you like. And, the funny thing was I spoke to my tutor, who was a law tutor, and I was explaining, why, I did like lots of things about the law, but that I wanted to do it in a more creative setting. And it was my tutor that said, why don't you try advertising? But what's interesting about this guy, and I don't know if he's as well known in the States, but my law tutor was a professor called Alexander McCall Smith. Now he's now one of the best-selling authors in the world. He quit his job not long after that, and he's now sold 60 or 70 million copies of his various novels, including a series of detective stories set in Botswana. So he's like, just the next level down from J.K. Rowling and, Stephen King and people like that. So I like to think that I sort of played a role in his career change. Maybe he sort of had his career chat with me and thought, hey, I'm going to do the same. I'm going to leave the law and do something more creative. Right. So maybe I played a tiny little part in his success story too.
That's awesome, man. I want to go back to something you were talking about, how you founded Lucky Generals with your partners. You have a pretty interesting story that's on the website. And I wanted to talk to you about that. It just said back in 2003, you said back then it was just three friends. It was Helen, you, and Danny, right? You guys were sitting in a pub, and then you guys just talked about how old agency model was broken, and you set out to create something different. I mean, one, what were you drinking? And then how did that come about, man? You know what I mean? I mean, how did you guys go to like, this is just not working And what was it about the old agency model that you said it's not working anymore?
Well, I can remember this very vividly. We were in a pub called the Bleeding Heart. And I guess, I don't know if that's, again, got the same significance, but it's sort of like Bleeding Heart Liberal, I guess, is a phrase over here. So we were, and we're all probably, that is probably quite a good maybe description of us, the three of us. And we've all known each other for a long time. We'd worked together for a long time before that, and we cared about the same sort of things.
Mhm.
And over quite a large quantity of red wine, it has to be said, we started figuring out that, yeah, while we worked for like some really good agencies, they were sort of big network, traditional agencies. Everything was being done in silos. And it was at that time, so this was 2013, when people were sort of creating divisions of things, like, people were setting up digital agencies or
Yeah.
social media agencies or tech agencies, and everything was a bit, compartmentalized. And we just sort of thought, sort of everything's digital, everything's social, everything's content and PR, it's just all the same stuff. We shouldn't sort of be super specialist about it. And also let's have some fun, because like, it feels like, and this is even more true maybe today, that the industry wasn't being much fun. And because we really like working with each other and we're mates, we thought, well, let's just do our own thing and definitely have lots of fun doing it too. And it's sort of proven right along the way.
No, I agree with you. I had a good friend. He actually said something along those same lines. It wasn't 9 years ago, but we had this conversation too. And he said, you know what? He said the ad agency model will die. He said the future is going to be strategic partnerships, is what he said, amongst agencies. If you remember years and years ago, it was one agency did everything for one client. And now agencies have to play really nice in the sandbox with other people. Like you talked about the silos. You may have the digital agency, right? They're great at that. You might have the social shop, and then you might have the creative shop. I mean, is that kind of the shift that you're seeing? And then how does Lucky Generals fit in to that?
Yeah, it's a really good thing that I think agencies do tend to sometimes say that they can do everything and probably not do a good job of it. And where our sweet spot, I think, is the development of the big sort of strategic idea and the big creative idea, the brand platform, whatever you want to call it, and then bring that to life through things like advertising, but also, PR, social, and content. So that kind of, the sort of ideas that are hard to define what exactly they are.
Right.
Then there's a whole bunch of other stuff that we probably are not the best people to go and get. We're probably not going to be your best agency for tons and tons of, I don't know, performance marketing or email driven marketing or huge amounts of experiential. We might do one-off stunts and experiences and things like that, but we like to sort of operate at the big strategic ideas, and then big, interesting, cool, creative moments. And then we work with other people and partners that do all the other stuff much better. Our first idea it was funny. I think this is pretty indicative. Our first idea that we ever ran was a campaign against homophobia in British soccer, which is a big problem. All these players, everyone's scared of coming out. Nobody's ever come out. And we had a very small budget campaign that involved giving out rainbow laces to all 5,000 football players in the country, and then getting fans and the media and everybody else to sort of get behind this idea, encourage the players to wear the laces,
Right.
and to share their support on social media. And so it was kind of hard to define what that idea was. I mean, it was literally marketing on a shoestring. Badoom. It was kind of, was it a PR idea or a social idea? Or I guess there was a bit of advertising. It was a product, I guess, as well, because we sold the laces. But I think an agency is quite often defined by its first few pieces of work. So that was
Mhm.
quite a helpful thing for us to sort of start life with,
Wow.
because people says, oh yeah, they're the guys that did the rainbow laces thing. And it's now like an absolute institution in the UK. It's been running for 7 or 8 years, and it's been a storyline in the country's biggest soap opera and all that kind of stuff. So it's that sort of stuff makes us, get out of bed in the morning.
No, that's awesome. But like, let's just say like, with an idea like that, with the rainbow shoelaces, what how do clients perceive that when you come up with a concept and it may be different from, their core values or what they may be very traditional in their approach, right? But then you may have an idea that may be so much today and tomorrow, but they want to continue to be the people of yesterday. So how do you cross that bridge with them? How do you cross that bridge with a client, Andy?
Yeah. So what I think the first thing is we don't work with that many clients. Like we've never wanted to have the hugest client list because we're probably, again, not right for a lot of companies. So we might not be right for very traditional companies that don't want to change. So we might not work with them in the first place. And so we say no an awful lot. And when we set up, we had this idea that we wanted to be a creative company for people on a mission. And that seems to be quite a good way of screening out people that, either want to change the world in some way or don't. Mm-hmm. And so by and large, the companies that we work with are people who are already quite up for doing something more interesting. And then if we come up with an idea that's, a little bit crazy or hard to define, then I think we try and sort of work really closely with them, allay any fears and sort of make them realize, don't worry, we've done this before. So having a good track record also helps because you kind of point to stuff you've done in the past. And then also just encouraging them to see, sometimes having something that's got a bit of risk attached, feeling nervous about stuff is a good feeling in a way, because I feel like the best ideas, you do feel a little bit of scaredness. It's never good if you're just presenting stuff you think, well, this is all right, and there's probably no risk of it failing, but there's no risk of it going massive either. It's quite nice to have a bit of tension, and so it's managing the tension. I think managing and as I say, past track record gets more and more helpful along the way, I think, on that.
You open up a great segue, and very proud of what you've done so far, and also seeing you have 100 employees that work with you, and you guys actually call them generals as well. I think that's pretty cool. But you talked about the mission, and there's a statement that came out, and you said, "We do our best work for people who want to make a dent in the universe." Tell me about that. I mean, does that kind of help your selection process to say, like, okay, we can only work with this client, or we want to work with this client? Andy?
Yeah, sure. I think that's a Steve Jobs quote that we've stolen, I think. But yeah, that's right. That's exactly what we say. And it means that when we have our very first, chemistry meetings with clients to find out if we're going to get along together, some clients really lean in when we say that, we're a creative company for people on a mission. They're banging the table and they're telling us, yeah, we want to do this, we want to do that. Other clients, sit back and feel a bit nervous, or which is fine if, they might not have cracked their mission yet. But if they really are against the idea of having one, if they say, look, all we want to do is grow sales by 5% this year,
right,
then we're probably not going to do a great job for them. Whereas it's fine if they say, look, we know we do want to do something a bit bigger in the universe, but we're not quite sure what it is. Can you help us figure it out? Then that's fantastic. But if they're just very narrow-minded and sort of only want to keep things ticking along, then we probably will politely say no at that point. And what's interesting is sometimes surprises you and this is why we sort of said it's for people on a mission, not companies on a mission. Sometimes all you need is one person that's like super, they've got to be relatively senior, but that really wants to do something, and they can help change their whole organization. Do you know what I mean? Like sometimes you can have an unlikely company. Like that Rainbow Laces idea came from a betting company. Like when we first met them, they wouldn't be high on our list of companies that we necessarily want to work with, but this guy was like an absolute force of nature, that he truly believed in it sincerely, wanted to do something. They make a lot of money out of soccer. He wanted to put something back. And then we just loved that individual. Individuals can do a lot of things if they're in the right places in organizations. So we always have a coffee and we see what they're like.
Well, Will Smith said something a long time ago. I was watching an interview. You probably know Will Smith, the actor. He said that he actually auditioned or he had a read for The Matrix when it first began. And then it was actually he turned it down. It was Keanu Reeves. And he said, that's the one project that he said he kind of, kicked himself for not taking. Has there ever been a project that you said, man, I wish we had taken that project, and you turned it down?
Oh my goodness, that's such a good question. I bet there is. Let me think. I'm gonna have to think about that. I might come back to that at the end, because it's a brilliant question. I immediately went to things that we had turned down and we were very glad about afterwards. Before we started, we were offered a big financial services company. It was a loans company. And they were going to give us a bit of business for a really big sum of money, without a pitch. But when we spoke to them, so we did the meeting, because who knows, they might, surprise us by being very mission driven. But it felt a little bit, wasn't quite right, because it felt like they were sort of targeting sort of maybe disadvantaged groups and trying to get them to take on more loans than they should really be taking on, and we didn't like the taste of it. So it was a funny thing though, but again, really helpful, because we'd not even set up, so we were at this point, we had no salaries, no clients, no anything. So it's sort of a little bit tempting to just take the money and get off to a great start. But we said no, and we never really looked back on that, regretting that. We're always really glad that we did make that decision. But I'm going to have to think about where have we said no to something and it's turned good. Actually, there's a sort of no, I'm going to think about that.
But still, I think, turning down that project is still good, because you chose purpose over profit. So it's still good. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I definitely want to come back to that question, because I want to know if there's one that you actually turned down, that you wish you had just said, that's the one that got away. I had someone on LinkedIn the other day, and this person, they'd interviewed with me years and years ago, before we really, started to get off the ground. And I didn't think like, hey, this person could be really useful, but now I see them doing all these amazing things, and I'm like, that's the one that got away from me. That's the one that got away from me. And like, man, I wish I was in a different headspace when I interviewed them. You know what I mean?
Totally.
So Andy, like, let's talk about like creative today. And there's companies like, Apple, and one that you work with, like Amazon. Where do you see creative? Like, where do you see it going? Because right now everyone's, being very safe. And also everyone's trying to speak to, I find them not just speaking to the masses anymore, but they're speaking to people, So where do you see creative going?
That's a big question. I mean, I guess one of the things that's happened over the last 2 years is that communications have become very serious. And I know why that's the case. Obviously, it's been tough times in the world, and lots of serious stuff to talk about. But I feel like it's sometimes a mistake to then literally say that we've got to be serious too as brands. Not that I'm not saying that we should all be fun and funny or use comedy all the time either. But it's kind of odd that, actually what a lot of the time we need in the world when things are tough is a smile on our faces. Yeah. And, if you look at the Super Bowl, for instance, more recently, where I think there was a lot of funny advertising for the first time in a few years, but we sort of treat that as the exception. It's a funny sort of business where we kind of say, well, let's do something great and funny for the Super Bowl, but then get back to doing really boring, serious stuff that people don't like for the rest of the year. And that always puzzles me, because like on the Super Bowl, you get, as you will know, you get people almost watching the game to watch the ads.
It's really the only time we look forward to commercials. That's it. Like I tell people, people don't like commercials. They don't like commercials. Yeah. The only time they're looking for it is let's just say like tomorrow night. Is anyone saying, hey, did you see the commercials in Thursday night's prime time on the network television? No. But we're looking for ads in the Super Bowl. I mean, everyone becomes a critic of the work.
Of course.
You know what I mean?
Exactly. Definitely. And so I sort of think, that's kind of it's funny that the industry doesn't realize then, oh wait, how could we create that effect all year round? Why? Because the rest of the year, like you say, people don't want to watch ads. We block them. We skim and skip them, and maybe the Super Bowl shouldn't be this anomaly that we get ourselves to do great work one day a year and then boring stuff the rest of the year. So I feel like we should perhaps remember some of the principles of that kind of world. Be more entertaining, be more fun. Don't start from the premise that anyone's interested in our brands. Most people, like you say, are not. We've all got bigger things on in our lives, and we don't care about brands, and I don't want to think about them. I don't necessarily even want a relationship with them, which is something we tell ourselves that everyone, wants. And because we spend all our time in marketing, obsessed by our product and all its technical details and all the rest of it, we sort of imagine that everyone else is going to be interested, and they're so not. So I'm hoping that there might be a turn in that direction, but if not, we don't care, because we do a lot of work that is quite fun, and so maybe it's good for our business if people don't realize that.
That's true. You bring up a good point. Like we used the Super Bowl to kind of bring out like some of our best work, and I'm almost comparing that to like the Easter holiday. It's like the one time where a lot of people go to church, like in Christianity.
That's right.
You know what I mean? So it's like maybe we should, be consistent with great creative or blockbuster creative, at least 6 or even 10 times a year versus that one time a year, right?
Yeah, that's right. It is. I've thought of an answer. I've got 2 answers now, I think, for your regrets. I've had a few questions. So what about the first one was takeaway food. So over here, and I guess it's maybe the same in the States, where there've been some huge brands built on sort of ordering takeaway food, pizzas, curries, Chinese cuisine, all the rest of it to your door online. And we, in our early days, turned down something, a couple of brands actually, that have all, and that whole sector has now taken off. It's absolutely massive in this country.
Oh, it's
and if
massive.
is it massive still in the States too?
Yeah.
And that's obviously the way that the whole industry is going. And of course, it was even more so in the pandemic. And if we'd had a brand and that was in that world already, that would have been very, very helpful. But at the time, it didn't feel quite as we were wondering how they were going to make money. And actually, a lot of those businesses still don't make money, so maybe we're not wrong. But anyway, that's something to kick ourselves. And the thing that we really kick ourselves about is that we never, every single year, we have talked about investing in Amazon, because we work with them obviously, and we know them, how good they are. And every year we tell ourselves, but it's already peaked. The value has gone up so much, it can't go up any further. And every single year we kick ourselves and think, oh my God, what have we done?
And look at what Amazon just did with actually doing Thursday Night Football. So that's going to help their brand. And then you see like Apple, they just launched a Tuesday Night Baseball. So, I mean, creative is coming from different parts now. One thing I wanted to bring up to you is, I was looking through a magazine, and you remember years ago when you're looking at a magazine, everyone who was in that magazine was perfect. They were a perfect model, perfect hands, teeth, size, and, according to whomever would say that's perfect. But nowadays, it is not that people want to use perfect people for ads anymore, because it almost takes out the realism out of it. Do you see that happening and that becoming more of a creative trend, Andy?
Yeah, definitely. I think people are much more savvy now, and in today's world, because we know the stories behind advertising and how it's created, and we understand that things are airbrushed. It's sort of incredible that that's just happened in the last sort of 10, 15 years perhaps. When our parents were growing up, I guess they thought that all those film stars, those movie stars, really did look that way, and they didn't realize how they'd been lit and how they'd been sort of their images had been perfected, and now we're a bit more knowledge about it. And I think the same goes for companies as well. Like, we know that a company can be telling us one thing and saying how good they are on, diversity or, representation of certain groups or things like that. But then we might find out, hold on a second, that they're not as good as that. And so you can't hide the truth anymore as a company. We've got the truth at our fingertips. We can very easily find out what the reality is. And I think so. So companies are maybe realizing that we know that the world isn't perfect, and perhaps we need to cast more, more like real people, rather than sort of the classic sort of perfection that they were chasing before, which is good.
No, that is good. When you look at creative, Andy, are you able to separate yourself to become a viewer, or are you always in creative mode to say, I would have done this different? Me, because I used to be in restaurants before I got into marketing, and so it was hard for me to go out to eat, because it was like, they could have done this. Is it hard for you to separate yourself from creative?
Yeah, it is a little bit, because you're always I'm the annoying dad, and my kids are, wanting to fast forward the ads, when we're watching, and I say, no, let's just watch these ads. This is what paid for the house, this is
right.
This is all the fun stuff. So I guess I am. I mean, I try to. What you've always got to do is realize that for a lot of stuff, you're not the target market. So sometimes what I think about something doesn't really make any difference, because it's that I'm not who they're selling to. So I do try and step out of that aspect, and talk to people in the in the target market. And I think just generally speaking to real people is a good thing for people in ad agencies. That often we live in these ivory towers, and we're in a big city, or we're surrounded by people who are like us, and just chatting to ordinary people about what they like is keeps you a bit more real, I guess.
Man, are there some campaigns right now that you see that you're like, wow, this is just great? And what are some of those brands? Like, let's just say, for an example, like we've all watched a brand like Apple, and notice I said brand, not the logo or just the design. Brands like Apple, and how they've become like so much part of our lives. And then we see how they market themselves. Are there some brands that really impress you with the way that they market, Andy?
Yeah, I think something like Apple is amazing, because they've been so consistently great over the years, and yet sometimes their advertising sort of changes from campaign to campaign. They don't have, it's their values that make them Apple. They don't really have a campaign vehicle as such, do they? They don't have a gecko or something like that. So I think but you can recognize it very quickly, that aesthetic of the minimalism, and then a bit of color and so on. So I do really admire Apple. But then at the other extreme, I love a brand like Patagonia, that maybe don't do advertising as such, but almost like everything they do is an advertisement of sorts. They might, whether it's stitching a little message about the election into the pockets of their clothes, and that's an ad, just as much as a billboard would be. So I think they're smart the way that they do that kind of thing. I love Spotify. That's another good example of a brand where they've used data, the kind of Spotify Unwrapped stuff, where they tell you at the end of the year what you've been listening to. And they do advertising about that as well, which is fun. But I think just the basic idea of analyzing your data in a cool and creative way is in itself advertising in a sense. I think that's the interesting thing about the last few years. Now, advertising is a really broad term. It can be all sorts of things. It can be it can be a shoelace. It can be a label in someone's clothes. It can be a product. It can be a testimonial. It can be all sorts of things. It doesn't have to be a TV commercial, does it?
No, you're right. But what is brand nowadays?
Yeah, branding is, I guess, about it's about having I guess a position in people's minds. I always think branding, there's an old phrase, I can't remember who said it first. It's what people say about you when you're not in the room. And probably it's not all that much. it's nice that, isn't it? You know, what do people say about when you're not in the room? And I guess it's
Right.
like, if we went to the nearest bar and said, you know, what do you think about Apple? You know, they're not going to use the same words that we might have on a chart or a brand pyramid, or, you know, but they probably wouldn't know that much about it, even for a brand as famous as Apple. But they might say something like, oh, they're really kind of creative, they are stylish, they've got really amazing technology, they're still pretty cool. They've been, you know, they're going to come up, you're going to come up with that sort of stuff. And that's really what a brand is. And then I think the other thing is, it's about, I think there's a better understanding now that brands are about actions. Like when I started in this industry, and maybe you were the same, like we used to talk a lot about, you know, it's the, well, we'd call it the communications industry, right? You know,
Yeah.
it's about
Yeah.
what we say. But I think now we increasingly realize that brands are about what they do, kind of more than what they say, because we know, like, if you're doing one thing and saying another, then you're going to get found out nowadays. So I think you can't really hide behind having a really cool, glossy advertising campaign.
Or ad or logo. I mean, no, it's great. That's
Yeah.
a great point. I love the way you put it, where it's what people are going to say about you when you leave the room. So I think that's a great point. One thing
one of the things I do is that whenever I first start working with a brand, I look, before I get my head clouded by, you know, the research documents and what the client tells me and all the rest of it, I go onto like social media, like onto this really snarky bits of like Reddit or onto Twitter, or I look for cartoons about the brand on Google Images, because I think cartoons and things like that are jokes. There's always a truth in them, you know, and that's
50% truth on all jokes. 50% truth on all jokes.
So you find out what do comedians say about this brand, is because their joke won't work unless there's a bit of truth in it. So that's always like really revealing, and is sometimes like a bit of a reality check for the client, when you can say, well, this is what you tell us the brand's all about, but this is what people actually say about you.
That's a good point. Good point.
So yeah, sorry, I interrupted you there.
No. You bring up a good point, because like you mentioned Reddit and some of these other social sites, and my question to you is, because let's just say when we got into the industry years and years ago, the closest thing we got to social was MySpace, you know? But then now, I mean, how much has social media changed creative, right? And also the distribution of it. I mean, how much? I mean, you think of that Super Bowl ad for the last Super Bowl. I mean, it had millions of views before we even saw the concert. But I mean, how much has social media changed creative?
Yeah, I think it's sort of there are obviously some major changes in the way that we you know, sort of the different places that we can get our message across. Also the fact that you can, if you create something good enough, people will spread your idea for you. In a weird way, I go back to this thing that Bill Bernbach said, you know, back in the 50s, you know, the great godfather of American advertising, said, you know, we think too much about change, and what we don't think enough about is what hasn't changed. You know, the sort of the basic human motivators that have been here since, you know, the year, you know, the beginning of the world sort of thing, because they're all still the same, right? I mean, like, we want to feel loved, feel respected, we want to feel part of a community, we want to aspire, we want to dream, you know, and actually, I guess social media just allows us new ways to do. You got to not forget that, because like I don't know if you're the same, but I read a lot about people saying, "Oh, it's changed everything," and you know, like for instance, Gen Z don't listen to, you know, they've got no attention span, and you got to make everything work in 6 seconds for them. And I get that, you know, there might be some truth to some degree in that, but then why are the people who are most interested, are most excited by the ads coming on, the younger people? And so I feel like there's a sort of a lot of, you know, sometimes we overestimate change when we could be also thinking about what hasn't changed in basic human sort of emotions.
Wow. Let's talk about Go Luck Yourself. Did you ever think like you were an author, or were you just like, okay, I have to brain dump and I got to go do this right now?
The funny thing about the book was I didn't really think of myself as a book. Actually, this shows how terrible at predicting things I am. I probably shouldn't admit this, but when the lockdown began, I thought, well, first of all, it's not gonna take very long. It might take a couple of weeks. And secondly, I'm gonna be really bored to do, and maybe I should try something like writing a book.
Hmm.
And of course, I was completely wrong because it went on for 2 years, and I know obviously we've all been working harder than we've ever worked. So it
Yeah,
was a stupid
absolutely.
idea to write a book. It's completely, but by that stage it was too late because I'd sort of committed to doing it with a publisher, and I had an editor on my back saying, "Where's my chapters? Where's my chapters?" So, and maybe that's a good thing because it makes sometimes you need a deadline, don't you?
They're pushing you
But
through it.
yeah, they pushed me
Yeah.
through it, and it took a global pandemic to make me write this book. But I kind of liked it because I feel like I've had a really lucky life, a really lucky career, and but I was really aware that a lot of people didn't have it so lucky the last couple of years, and a lot of the
Yeah.
big stories in the world, I think, touch on luck. Things like Black Lives Matter or Me Too. The idea of privilege. And while it was tempting to sit at home because of the pandemic thing, I've been so unlucky. I kind of thought, no, actually, so many people have had it much less lucky than me. So I wanted to write a book about luck that could bring some luck to others. So the big thing in the book is that all the royalties go to help. It's an organization that helps working class kids get a lucky break into the industry.
Hmm.
So I like a bit of karma that can write about the role of luck in building a brand, because I really think that does play a role, and then that might bring a bit of luck to other people, and that was a nice way to sort of get myself out of the pandemic blues and not feel so
Yeah.
sorry for myself, I guess.
Man, Andy, I enjoyed our conversation, man. I really do, man.
Yeah, I've really enjoyed it too. It's a
I
great chat.
I got to make sure I follow up on you. So I'll probably send you something on LinkedIn so we can stay connected and I can follow some of that awesome work that you're continuing to do, man. So, and hopefully you do the same and we can, stay connected across the pond. How about that?
Definitely. That sounds brilliant. I really appreciate you having me on. I've loved this chat, and let's keep in touch.
Yeah, absolutely, man. And I want to thank all of our listeners for actually listening in to Mr. Andy. Andy, go ahead and give people your website address and how they can find you and the Lucky Generals. How can they do that?
Okay, so our website is pretty simple. It's luckygenerals.com. And the book, Go Luck Yourself, is available in all the usual places, Amazon, and pretty much, I guess, all the other usual online bookstores and that you might have in the States and elsewhere. So, thanks, everyone, and stay lucky.
Awesome. Andy, you've been an amazing guest, man. I look forward to staying in touch with you, and we'll actually put those show notes and a link to your book inside of this on YouTube as well. Okay?
That's fantastic. Thanks. Thanks.
Awesome. Andy, thank you so much for being an amazing guest, and this is the AdCast.